So welcome if you are joining us. We are the Indigenous Environmental Network, and this is our series on Indigenous Feminisms. If you're just joining us, we're just waiting for some more folks to join us, and then we'll get started with our panelists and our discussion on Thanksgiving. Thanks-taking to some people.
Thanks-taking.
So if you're on the Zoom, please introduce yourself and where you're from. Let us know who's out there. I know some people are watching on Facebook Live and some people are on Zoom. So give a shout out and say hello. If you are joining us. Oops. We have a couple second delay, so. All right. So I think we're actually going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our webinar on Indigenous Feminisms, our series on Indigenous Feminisms. This is the Indigenous Environmental Network. And today we are going to be talking about Thanksgiving and its connection to colonization and how we navigate that. And so I'm really excited actually today to be able to moderate this panel because it is my co-workers, my sisters at IEN. IEN always, we have strong women on staff and in leadership. And so today I get to sit and visit with my sisters about this very important topic. And I'm just really pleased to be able to do that. And as we consider ourselves feminists, and how we are working in this world, how we are walking in this world. So I don't know about y'all, but I love to eat. And so Thanksgiving is problematic for me because I grew up really understanding in my community and in my family the difficulties with colonization and what that really meant for us. And yet I attended public school where we celebrated Thanksgiving. Sometimes I saw headdresses and feathers and all those kind of stereotypes that were really harmful and really hurtful to me. And yet I was just a little kid in my class. And sometimes I felt okay speaking up about it and sometimes I didn't. And I know that many of us experienced that same thing in school. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today is how do we navigate colonization and it's so ingrained, right? From the time we were just little kids, it's something that's just sort of taken for granted. This narrative, this myth about the way that Europeans came to Turtle Island, that it was this smooth transition, that it was this meal that we sat down and took together, this sort of sugarcoating, if you will, of colonization. And it's hard for us to exist in that kind of weird space, right, of understanding the myths. And also, as I said before, we love to eat, and feasting is not something that's new to us as Indigenous people. Giving thanks, feasting, sitting down together, that's something that almost all tribes, as far as I know, do. And so when we think about Thanksgiving, I think many of us feel torn because we understand the trauma of it. We understand that it represents colonization, that it negates our own worldview, that this myth of Thanksgiving negates our own narrative as Indigenous peoples. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. We're gonna talk a little bit about traditional foods, turkey, wild rice, corn, squash, all of the foods that Indigenous peoples gifted to the world are also part of this celebration. And also part of this problematic meal and this problematic holiday. So I think right now what I'm going to do is introduce our panelists and start asking some questions. So we're going to start with Eva Blake, who has been with IEN for about 1 year. She is Wampanoag from Massachusetts, And she has a lot to share with us because her people were some of the first peoples who had to come in contact with colonists. And as I was reading up on Thanksgiving and colonization, and on the Plymouth colony, I read that the colonists actually robbed graves as one of the first things that they did when they got here. And I thought about what I learned in school and how different that was. The reality is so different from the myth that we have all learned. And so we're going to have Eva start us off. And next we will go to Bineshi Albert. Many of you have seen her here because she is often my co-host for our Indigenous Feminisms webinars. And Kandi White, who is from Montana, Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara. And she will be talking to us as well in just a little bit here. So I think we'll go ahead and start off with Eva. And if you want to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about what does Thanksgiving mean for you?
All right, now I'm not on mute. Thank you, Simone Katabatash, Winina Khan, Wami, Nitalpak, Natasuis, Eva Blake, Nutama, Sasanet Wampanak. Good evening, good night, everyone. My name is Eva Blake, and I am a Sonet Wampanoag. And to me, you know, this obviously has been an extremely problematic holiday for me because I am Wampanoag. And if you have never heard the word Wampanoag, that's very, very, very problematic at this point in time because the Thanksgiving myth, when they say that, you know, they sat down with the Indians and the Pilgrims, those Indians were us, our ancestors, there were 69 different communities, villages, or tribes of Wampanoag people at the time that these English came to settle in our land. So for me growing up, it was always a matter of as Natayanian, that we are still here, always having to tell people our name, to tell people that we are still alive today. We came really close to extinction, honestly. When the Pilgrims first arrived here, the English first came here, and they had that, you know, memorable experience that people make such a big deal out of today. We had already lost 90% of our population to a plague that had come through only, you know, maybe from 1616 to 1619, you know, all up and down the East Coast. We had death, so much so that the English settlers, the Pilgrims themselves, said that the land that they started to build their houses on, that they had to, that they saw the skulls and the bones from the people because there weren't enough people left to bury that many people who had died. And so I bring that up now because obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic as well. So to me, it has always been a very problematic holiday, but also still just the dichotomy, what you've mentioned, Simone, of enjoying being with my family and eating food. So I'll stop there. And should I pass it to someone, or were you going to? I'll pass it to Kandi, or Bineshi was going to go next, right?
Thank you, Eva.
Hi, Hassan. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bineshi Albert, and I am Yuchi in Anishinaabe, and calling in today from Wewoka, Oklahoma. So good to see everyone here. Remind me again the question we started out with, Simone.
What does Thanksgiving mean to you? How did you celebrate, or how did you observe or not observe? What did you do on Thanksgiving, Bineshi?
Yeah, like others, you know, I have mixed feelings about it, and and some of those feelings have changed and evolved over the years. I have very fond memories of cooking with family during this time. And so my grandmothers have been gone for some time now. And so I love the late night cooking, early morning cooking, getting ready and preparing. And that has such fond memories for me of women fellowship, sisterhood, you know, is what when my grandmothers instructed me what to do or how to make things. And so I have very good memories of that. And it's lonesome, you know. My grandmothers have been gone for a long time, so it makes me miss them during those times. Um, but yeah, I you know, the holiday is different for us. You know, it's a time to get together and share a meal, break bread, you know. Um, but this year was different too because of COVID. You know, it's usually a pretty big family gathering, and it was just me and my immediate family bubble, right? There was just a few of us, ones that we know, you know, we're in community together, and you know, used lots of precautions outside in the public. And so um so it was a smaller, more intimate time. But yeah, I mean, I think the mixed feelings I have about it, much of, like Eva had shared, is, you know, there's a history that has been sold in the mainstream, um, and there's a history that has been twisted also by capitalism, right? Of like, this is a time for consumption, like literal consumption. um, and so that is juxtaposed with the love and warmth I feel of being in the kitchen with my grandmothers, right? And the idea that you cook together, you feed each other, you feed family. It's an expression of love and care and thanksgiving, right? Of being thankful and grateful and humble. That's not something new for us. Um, but yeah, and then, you know, this other idea of like this meal, this mythical meal of sharing, um, you know, that sometimes it's sometimes funny to think about that and like what really happened and understand. And, you know, I was fortunate that I grew up in a family that was very upfront about, you know, asking questions and making sure that us kids were asking questions about like, what does that mean? And in school, asking questions like, why do you want me to wear these feathers um, just in these few days before Thanksgiving, but you don't want to acknowledge my Indianness any other time of the year. Right? So yeah, and so I was at least fortunate to grow up in a family that like made my brothers and sisters and I like question that, but also reminded us that um, that feasting and food and being humble and thankful for what we have is part of our being and our culture and our people.
Thank you, Bineshi. I think we're going to go to Kandi now. So what does Thanksgiving look like in your household, Kandi? What does it mean for you and your community?
Well, dosha marugoet marashima ishuya hets. And so in Hiradza, I said, hello, relatives. My name is Eagle Woman. My English name, ironically enough, is Kandi White. Such a juxtaposition. And it's been, you know, I cooked. It was just me and our little family unit as well, because I'm living in Montana now, but I'm from North Dakota. As Simone said, Mandan Hiradza, Rikuran Nations, and COVID is just raging here. And it's just that stubbornness and also misconception about one and one can't hurt you. So it's weird because we're seeing people that are dealing with another trauma. And Thanksgiving, it reminds me of, I always feel conflicted on that day, and I don't want to feel conflicted. I feel that same warm fuzziness about cooking and being with family that Bineshi was sort of painting a picture of. But then it's also that history is ingrained in my mind. And I worry that people are romanticizing Natives, as they do a lot, and forgetting about the brutality and forgetting about everything that we went through in this country and continue to go through to this day, instead of telling that true story. And it always comes back to me like it's not in the past, it's not history. I think of Standing Rock. When I'm thinking of Thanksgiving, I'm thinking of Standing Rock and standing there getting shot at by police, you know, and I'm thinking, are people making that connection? You know, yeah, you want to feel good. You don't want to ruin your whole day, but you also, the erasure that exists bothers me. And I put a post about that on Facebook on Thanksgiving. And I literally had to defend myself, I felt like, by saying, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. You know, I started out by saying that because I didn't want people to feel negative on that day. It's supposed to, especially with COVID, you know, people need sometimes to feel happy, but I said, but I wanted to use this day as a day to put out the truth around the erasure, you know, calling us something else instead of, you know, natives or instead of our tribes. You know, we have names. And that whole level of erasure and myth around the romanticism always hits me all at once on Thanksgiving Day. And how do I deal with this? My second grader here is like, it's Thanksgiving. Are we going to eat a turkey? You know, because that's what they're taught. Yet I bear the burden alone of not only teaching her, but then the rest of the people in her school system, for example, living out here in a place where there's not really many natives. How do I take on a whole education system? It feels like a lot of the burden to bear, but then who else is going to do it if we don't, as moms, as women, standing up and speaking for our children and the rights of all of those that are unheard. So yeah, I cooked, and me, you know, it was really great with my daughter because she wants to be in the kitchen, making those memories. And then I also have this conflict of the turmoil of what the history means.
Thank you, Kandi. You sum up things so well. I just love listening to all of you speak because I'm just reminded again how thankful I am to have you all on our IEN team, and how much I value the wisdom, knowledge, strength, experience, and articulation that you all bring to the table. It makes our team so much stronger. And just want to thank you again for being on this panel and talking about this very important topic. And as we're talking, I'm making notes. I hope I can remember to ask because I think there's a lot of really rich discussion that can come from just this first intro piece. One of the things I was thinking about, and I'm going to go back to Eva for this one, is, you know, this idea of like, what do we want people to know? You know, Kandi just said, do people make that connection between Standing Rock and Thanksgiving? You know, we all introduced ourselves by our, I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself by my nation, but I'm from Red Lake Nation, Anishinaabe. And, you know, what would you like people to know when they think about Thanksgiving? Just some of the things, Eva, if you want to share with us. You're on mute. Yep.
Yes. Well, I'm still thinking about one thing that Bineshi was saying in passing was that Thanksgivings are nothing new to us as Native people, right? And so I really think it's important for people to understand that when I am the Debbie Downer at Thanksgiving, because I am a lot of the time, you know, we even have the day of mourning that was started in 1970 here in Plymouth. You know, we call it the day of mourning because of all of the loss that we have suffered because of the actual events that are being now celebrated, right? So we do hold, you know, I'll say it, we have a little bit of anger still. We still have a lot of hurt still left from the not even just the myth, the real events, you know, that the myth is referring to. But I think it's important for people to know that, you know, as Native people, we may be celebrating on that day because we have the day off and because we have a space to cook and to be with our families and to enjoy our foods and to think about our traditional foods and our harvest celebrations. But there are other times of the year when we're also having what really is a Thanksgiving. In the springtime, we have our strawberry Thanksgiving, where we give thanks for the strawberry, the first fruit to come, the leader of the fruits. So we have a strawberry Thanksgiving. We have a Thanksgiving when the herring run comes back up in the spring. before Strawberry Thanksgiving. And then afterwards, in the summer, we have our green corn ceremonies, which are Thanksgivings, and they're given. And the use of the word Thanksgiving itself is kind of significant, because these Thanksgivings, the English had what they considered Thanksgivings, and then we had our own Thanksgivings. The English never called this original, what the myth is referring to, as a Thanksgiving. The English Thanksgiving was a day of prayer that was actually marked by fasting and very solemn observance of events. They did a lot of those, and they called those Thanksgivings when they killed people, like after the Pequot massacre in 1636. They killed 700 Pequot women, children, elders. They lit fire to all of their homes and killed them as they came out. They had an official Thanksgiving Day in Boston. It was called that, right? But again, this original harvest feast thing that the myth is referring to, they did not consider that a Thanksgiving, because it was really a celebration of their harvest. And for them, a Thanksgiving was a fasting. It was a religious holiday. This was not a religious holiday for them. So I think that it's really, the dichotomy is interesting, that 200 or 300 years later, they decided to name it a Thanksgiving. It's like borrowing from our practice and labeling it on top of something else, almost, I feel, on purpose, to make it so that we feel this tension between, I want to embrace Thanksgiving because it's natural to us. It is, and it's a beautiful thing to be with family and to, be grateful and to take count of, all of the gifts that we're given from Mother Earth and Father Sky, and really, because harvest time was a community thing too. It's a very celebration of community coming together, before we might go our separate ways through the winter time in our winter location. So the use of the word Thanksgiving, I think it is really important that just because we want to make a point and remind people of the hurt and the pain and the death, quite literally, is not to say that we don't celebrate, that we don't celebrate these things like family and food. So I would really love for us to continue to bring back those Thanksgivings throughout the year, so that we can feel satisfied and whole in those ways, but to let go, of the myth itself and to confront it when we see it, because the myth itself is as others have already said, is continuing a legacy of erasure that is very harmful to us even till today.
Yeah, I see the other two panelists nodding. Does anyone want to jump in, Bineshi or Kandi?
Yeah, I could jump in. I just want to add a little bit and say that it's not like we can change the past, right? But by changing the story of how we tell it, then we can actually heal from the harms and remember that there was trauma, that there is trauma, and this country never even tried to even apologize for all of the trauma. I think Canada tried and Australia tried. I mean, at least they did an apology. I don't know, I know there was conflict how people felt, but I think I was reading an article my husband had sent me, and it was talking about that being part of the healing process, is just recognizing it in the first place. And I feel like we're not even there yet in this country. We're just like, oh, you people, oh, why do you always have to be like that? And there's an erasure of the trauma that happened to us. And that's where a lot of the hurt comes in, is not even giving us the space to heal by telling the story of history in the way that it should be, when in our school systems, they keep teaching us all of these horrific things around who are American heroes in the past, and not talking about us as being some of those heroes, and us, even us women sitting here now being heroes. We should be in a book because we survived. You know what I mean? And so that's what I want people to know. I want people to not be afraid to hear the real story. And I want them to stop erasing us in the textbooks and in the children's learnings from elementary school all the way on up. It should be right there in the curriculum around what really happened and how we can move forward and heal from that, and learn from Indigenous peoples today that exist and that we're not erased.
Exactly. I think that one of the things that we navigate as Indigenous peoples on the daily, right, is this: when we navigate colonization, when we now navigate living in a colonized land, is how do we fight and live and laugh and raise our children and tell our truths and face our traumas and build our nations and do our work and take care of Mother Earth and our families. All of those things, we're always navigating that really, that balancing act, right? And Bineshi and I talk about this a lot, right? Is how do we we acknowledge our truth, we speak our truth, and then we laugh and we joke and we enjoy and we fill our hearts with joy and happiness. And I mean, Bineshi and I, we deal with some really difficult stuff, but we also laugh till our stomachs hurt. And I think that's one of the ways that we, I can tell, that we navigate that, and that's a powerful thing. And so I want to hear from Bineshi about, like, what do you think are some of the harms that come from these myths, and how do we live with those? How do we work in that state? Or anything else you want to talk about?
Well, yeah, I'll do both of those, the previous one too. But, you know, I think growing up, the two things I want to share with others that were shared with me growing up is, one, is the act of that community being there was an act of taking, right? They took land. The colonists, like this idea that they settled, right? When you use the word settled, you're changing like this concept of like, they took the land and they took it by force, right? So that's one. The second is the food that is considered traditional Thanksgiving food. That's all our food. I mean, those are our foods. Those are our foods. From corn to turkey to cranberry, like all of it. Those are our foods, you know, and you know, they've become part of Norman Rockwell imagery around, you know, white nuclear families and this like peaceful like thing, but those are our foods, right? Those are the things that we had. And so those are two things that, you know, I wanted like share that, you know, my family shared with me when I was growing up. And so this concept of the benevolent settler, or the frontiersmen, the pilgrims and Puritans who came to this country to avoid religious persecution. Those are like stories that get told instead of, they were sold this idea, if you go to the Americas, you can get land and it's just there for the taking, right? Like that's what they were sold. They were sold this idea, if you go to the Americas, you can get land because it's just free and open because the savages there, you know, they don't know whatever. And so this idea of the benevolent settlers, or this like benevolent meal, is it's a half truth, right? It's a half truth. If you don't tell the whole thing, it's still a falsehood, right? If you don't tell the whole thing of that land was taken by force, that the people settled, the Pilgrims and Puritans settled on that land that was taken by force from the people there. and that, you know, the Wampanoag people had to fight for their land and to fight for where they were at, and still at times had to break bread, right, with people who they were in war and battle with. But that imagery of this peaceful meal erases the actual harm in that moment of time, that perpetuates a continued erasure of this moment in time. I mean, Kandi has said that, like, that continued idea that Indian people are primitive, that Indian people are savages, that Indian people don't know or need to be taken care of. That gets continued to be perpetuated today, and that does cause harm today. It causes harm in terms of how our governments view what their relationship should be with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous nations. It causes harm in feeling like they can make regulations or rules or institutionalized rules in the care and management of Indian peoples. It is a perpetual harm. And so when we continue to like share this story of this benevolent meal, it continues to perpetuate that the Puritans and the Pilgrims, they came here peacefully. And that's not what happened. They came here knowing that they could take land by force and that they would have the backing of their governments to take the land by force. The Second Amendment was initiated around the idea of militia being able to be armed to take land by force. That's the foundation of our country, this country here, this nation state that is called the United States. Like that's what exists, and that's the harm that continues to get perpetuated by this sort of myth of this peaceful meal of Thanksgiving.
Absolutely, absolutely. And something that has been said is that Kandi says, we're here now. It's not history, it's now. It's us now. And I think, you know, I've also heard us say like things like we didn't want to be a Debbie Downer, or we don't want to be negative. And I think that it's a powerful tool of oppression when our truth is equated with being negative, right? To tell our truth, to tell our own story, to tell our narrative is equated with being negative, with being a Debbie Downer, and it silences us. And that's why I'm so pleased that we're able to come together and talk today very openly about what Thanksgiving means to us, and the effect that it has on our nations, on Mother Earth. You know, this land has changed dramatically from the sort of, you know, we talk about people coming and seeing this beautiful land, and it's green and it's open and it's clean and it's water. And after 500 plus years of colonization, look where we are now. And I think that also speaks to the clash of worldviews that happened with colonizers and Indigenous peoples, particularly for us at the Indigenous Environmental Network, about the relationship with Mother Earth. I was, you know, my family was having Thanksgiving dinner a few years ago, and we were at my dad's house, and we were having venison that, you know, one of us got, and wild rice that I got, and, you know, squash that we grew. And it was funny, we were looking out the window and there were wild turkeys running around in the yard, you know. And it just kind of shifts your perception sometimes when you see these things, like what, you know. But I want to allow you all to talk again. So Eva or Kandi, do you have something you'd like to add? And Eva, I was thinking too is, you know, I keep flashing back to these images when I was in school in the 70s. And we used to have to make those little turkey hands, you know, with the feathers and all those things. But the images of the natives in there were very, you know, like they had little cute little cheeks, and they were all happy, and they were always just called Indians. You know, and as I know and learn about Wampanoag people, you know, your culture is so rich and beautiful and varied. I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you so much. I do have something I'll add. One is just a quick factoid, which is because you were saying you were having venison. And venison is actually historically the only food that was written that was eaten at that original meal. And that was because, another part of the myth is that this happy meal, that we were invited somehow, right, to this meal. The Wampanoag people were not invited to this meal at all. We showed up because they were firing off their guns. They were firing off their muskets so much in celebration of their harvest that 90 warriors showed up. Like, what's going on here? That's how the original meal started. And when the 90 men in Massasoit Usamiquin, our supreme sachem, arrived, and they saw that, that it was something that they had to be concerned about, they went and got 5 deer and brought it back. And that's pretty much all we know about about what has turned into this huge thing. It's one paragraph. It's literally like, a few sentences that this whole myth has been raised on. But the other thing that I think I'd also just like to say that is very ironic is that, because there's so many ironies involved in this holiday, right? But one of the things that strikes me in terms of thinking about the power of women, right? And our Wampanoag women are very, very strong women. And I actually honestly feel a little bit bad because I feel like there are so many other women who know this history who should be speaking. But, anyway, is that the part of the woman's power came from being in control of the house and the home and the fields. So we did all of the horticultural work. We were, farming people, and it was the women did all of the farming, except for tobacco. The men grew the tobacco. But, and not just all of the farming, but like all of the harvesting, the shell fishing, things like that. We had our distinct roles, between what was thought of as more feminine, nurturing, life-giving, cultivating things, as opposed to the men had a more, they worked with fire and stone tools. They did the hunting and the more on the male destruction of life side of things, because we acknowledge there's a balance, there's a range, right, of these energies at play. But the irony of Thanksgiving is that as we look to say, oh, this is a harvest celebration in terms of the food and the bounty that's coming from the land, it was the English people who took away our ability as Wampanoag women to farm to have the land to provide for our people at all. And so that fact of basically flipping our whole economy, where the men were doing hunting and fishing, we were doing farming, and then the English told us that we women weren't supposed to do any of that work, that the men were lazy, the men were supposed to do the farming, and forget about the hunting and fishing, because now you can't even go to those places anymore because so land left, turned us into landless people, and forced so much impoverishment on us that it's like very ironic that now this is about this bountiful harvest meal, but we can't do that anymore for our people. We're still, pretty much landless. We're in the courts today. The Mashpee tribe right now is in the courts. One of the first times in modern history since the termination era that a tribe has, been threatened with having their land taken out of trust. That's the same tribe that the Pilgrims in this myth. So there's so much irony, but I think it's really important to understand that was part of the beginning of how we lost a lot of our power as women, specifically in our communities.
Definitely, and I want to go to Kandi next. You can talk about whatever you like, but I also wonder if you will talk a little bit about your corn.
Sure. I mean, as Eva was talking, I was just like, yeah, manifest destiny, the doctrine of discovery, all these things that people might not even know what those mean. And if you don't, look it up because that is something that we should also be being taught all the time. And like even now, you know, people think, oh, you have reservations, right? You have this land that was set aside. Okay, first of all, the reservation I'm on was cut and cut and cut by the federal government, taken away from us. And we didn't even want to be there in the first place. And we were forced to be there. And then it got so small that it's down to what it is now. And then half of it is held in trust by the federal government, because as Bineshi said earlier, oh, you know, we're belittled to the point where we, according to this federal government, don't even know how to manage our own lands. And that's messed up. And that's right now in this day and age with fee land, patent land, trust land, our checkerboarded reservations. And then I feel bad even saying that because there's tribes that are fighting to even be federally recognized. Do people know that? There's like 575 federally recognized tribes or more now, give or take. And then there's those that are fighting to keep that status or get that status. So you have natives walking around totally native, but the federal government says you're not because we say you're not. And that's right now in this day and age, you know. So I wanted to put that out there and mention that because it is something that's so real. And that's what also is really real right now, especially at home, is like we have a lot of ranchers and a bunch of farmers that are male, like what Eva was saying. And for my tribes, Mandan, Hiradza, Rikra nations, that was as early as, you know, ago in history as the 1950s, when they commissioned the Pick-Sloan Act, which built a series of dams along the Missouri River and flooded a series of reservations, all because of what the Army Corps of Engineers did in St. Louis and Missouri by removing natural riparian water zones, and that caused flooding. So in order to fix it, you know, another false solution was to put dams on reservations, and it happened to my community, was one of them, with the Garrison Dam. When that happened, all of our class 1 and class 2 agricultural lands, well, 80%, something like that, were flooded and destroyed. And we got put on the highlands up on the top where the land was brittle and it wasn't good to farm up there. And I literally come from a town called Newtown because they kept saying it's going up into the new town, put those supplies in the new town. And that was like 1947, you know, and then it was closed in like 1952 is how long it took. And so for people to, again, recognize that this is a lot sooner and a lot more relevant in this day and age than what people want to accept. Like, you know, in the 1600s was a long time ago, I hear people say. Well, the 1950s for my grandma and all the people that are still living with the trauma of that relocation wasn't that long ago, right? And that's when we were forced into becoming cowboys. They were like, here, have cattle instead of hunting and instead of farming. So Eva, everything you were saying was just like reminding me of all this stuff that we've gone through, and where do we sit now with our own history and what our kids know and understand about farming. Well, thank God for, you know, my friends, people like Twyla Baker, you know, she is the president at our Nueta Hiradza Sanish College, and they've been planting corn and they've been bringing back traditions, and they give out food to the community because we were farmers. We grew corn, squash, beans, so much of what you were saying, Eva, about how the women tended to the crops with their babies on their backs, and how the men grew tobacco, and how the women were the keepers of the earth lodges. Like, we were the ones who owned those. And, you know, if a man came home and all his stuff was sitting outside, well, that meant he wasn't in that earth lodge anymore, you know, because we women had that much say and control over all of these processes of life giving. Like you were saying, men were, in my cultures too, the keepers of the fire. And the thing is, another bump in the road of history for my tribe specifically, we are 3 tribes that were forced to live on the same reservation together. Mandan, Hiradza, Rikara, we have our own languages. Try learning 3 different languages growing up. It's so hard, especially Rikara. And, you know, trying to teach it to the kids, and, you know, understanding these clashes between our own tribes because we were forced into this situation, and it all had to do with smallpox. Our numbers were so wiped out. We were so attacked. And because we lived in earth lodges and because smallpox was airborne, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of us died. And it was so bad that there's accounts of people committing suicide, which is something we did not do. But that's how bad it was. People dying with rotted faces. And that history is still, all of these memories, all of these emotions come up around these kind of holidays. And so when I think about corn, which you said, Simone, before, it makes me actually feel happy because it's one of the things that like survived. But it's kind of sad too, because people say, oh, that's Indian corn. You know, if you see the different colors and stuff, instead of just calling it what it is, corn, oh, that's Indian corn. And because everybody's used to the yellow modified corn, which is mostly sugar. It's like really bad for you. The carbs that are in corn are like out of control. The yellow corn you get in the market. And thank God we still have our own seeds now. Or thank creator. I don't even know what to say. Thank you to the higher powers that allow us to have our seeds where we can still grow our traditional corn. And it's good. And there's all these uses. I remember learning about, just Mandan corn alone in like 9 different kinds, and trying to teach people about all the different ones, how there was even one for popping corn, you know? And do people think of popcorn as a traditional native food? I bet you they don't, you know? But that reality that exists that people should feel, I want people to feel that history and that rich culture that we have, you know? You don't have to be in a big city like New York City to have culture, you know, to be able to go to Broadway or whatever it is. There's such a rich culture with us, the natives that have been here always, you know, 500 years plus way before. And the Arikara came from the south, way down south, and had their own corn. And the Mandan Hidatsa met up along one confluence of the Missouri River, and we all shared all these different traditions and knowledge that we had on planting and growing our crops. And I'll say this to end, our crops were bomb. They are good seeds because they don't even, some of the stalks don't even grow that tall because they don't put all that energy into the stalk. They put it into the growing of the corn. They're like drought resistant, pest resistant. They didn't have to put all these chemicals and nitrogen and stuff that you now see in corn that is grown commercially, because our seeds had hundreds of years of learning how to grow along the banks of the Missouri River and how to grow in a short time frame. And we're losing that with genetically modified crops. And with those big bad organizations like Monsanto and all those bad ones out there, and even people that try to grow genetic organic crops have a hard time because some of their neighbors will be spraying and it gets sprayed, and corn talks. We used to talk about that all the time. We used to sing to our corn all the time because corn has spirits. And scientifically, it's, you know, cross-pollination. But we always just said our corn talks to each other. And if you put this kind here and this kind here, they're going to intertwine and you're going to get a new kind of corn. And those are things that people are losing the knowledge on. And that's what I would like people to recognize and understand. You just maybe go off on corn. I'll check there.
I wanted you to go off on corn because I think it's really, you know, we're talking about food as well as we talk about this, and food is so integral to who we are, to our relationship with the land, to our culture, to our spirituality, to our survival. It speaks of our worldview. It's reflected in our language. And we are talking about a holiday about food. So I wanted you to go off on corn, Kandi. And I'm going to go to Bineshi in just a second too, because she also has rich corn in her history and in her now. But I wanted to also just make a couple observations. One is, of course, as you're all talking, I'm doing the same thing you are. It's like, oh yes, that's me too. And I bet you our listeners are thinking a lot of that too. You know, and our listeners, for natives and non-natives, you know, there's so much for us to learn, for us to be proud of, for us to learn from and fix, for us to face. And I think it's just a really beautiful process. Truth is hard, and it's also, what do they say? It sets you free. But I was thinking about my own community and the role of women and wild rice, where wild rice was not only staple food, but it was spiritually and culturally very significant. And we came from, you know, the area that our relatives, the Wampanoags, were on, you know, on the East Coast, and we moved west, and our prophecies told us to go until we, you know, find the food that grows on the water, and that's wild rice. And that was really a lot of the within the authority of women in our society, and that had a lot of power, right? That economy, if you will, right, of wild rice, and that women had that power, and that colonization changed that. You know, colonization, it's deep, and it's deeply affected so many things, you know, our role as women, of our power, our food, all of those things. It can never be understated. And I think it's just so important that we continue to speak about it. And let's see. Oh, I was also really thinking about, well, you know what, I'll save that because I want to go to Bineshi now to talk about whatever you like. And also if you want to share a little bit about corn, or go off on corn if you want to.
Corn is yummy. You know, like Eva, we have a green corn ceremony, and it's a harvest New Year's ceremony, right? We have a whole faith system based on corn, and that corn is a living being body that gave itself for us. And so, you know, there's dances, and there's fasting, and there's medicine. And then there's a feast, right? There's a feast of Thanksgiving, of appreciation, right? And you know, this sense of like, feed people in the community, feed everyone, whoever comes, you feed them. And as a way for us to not only show our, you know, being grateful and humble, but also to ensure prosperity and ensure a good, you know, winter, that everyone will be safe and happy to get through the winter with the crops, right? And so we have a whole religion based on corn. And but yeah, I just wanted to tag on to what Simone was saying about, like, you know, Thanksgiving, you know, is this microcosm picture of the impacts of colonialism on our peoples, right? It's just one moment, right? One tiny moment, but it's been continued to be perpetuated all the way till today. But it's a snapshot of what has happened to change our peoples. You know, the women, you know, as I was older, you know, I took some time to like try to like understand a little bit more of the history of Yuchi people, because we weren't always from Oklahoma, right? That's where we are now, and that's where we were moved to. We were forcibly moved to come here. But our peoples are from further east, right? Around Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Carolinas. You know, my people are from that area. And what was our history prior to colonization, or even in early colonial times? And one of them is this idea of commerce and trade and the role of women, right? And so, you know, in those early colonial days, there was lots of trade around salt, which was one of the things that we traded. And then hides, pelts and hides. And men hunted those, women processed them, right? Like they cleaned and tanned and did that work. But the wealth of the community was held by the women, right? So the idea of negotiating price was actually held by the women, and what they got for any products that got traded with anybody. But early colonial frontiersmen only wanted to negotiate with the men, right? So that they changed that system so that the women were taken out of it for no other reason except that they weren't used to dealing with women on negotiating wealth, right? Or negotiating price or cost. And so, you know, when you think about like what was going on with women in the European construct, sometimes it makes me really sad when I think about how hard it was. But that that sort of ideology and thinking and construct that was happening to European women traveled to the Americas, and it came to the Americas. And so this idea of knowledge, it was not to be held by women. Wealth was not to be held by women. Voice was not to be held by women. Those were constructs that came with colonization, and they got reinforced over the centuries, right? Like in schools, in churches, in faith, in all of that. This idea that women's roles were supposed to be this other way, right? And so, I always tell people, like, today we have to examine what is really ours and the evolution of our culture. Our cultures are not static, right? There's not a fixed place of what is a traditional Indian or a traditional Yuchi person or a traditional Anishinaabe person. We were always evolving. We were evolving our music, our art, our craft, our all of it. But we have to think about, like, what has colonization changed our culture, and what are those things that have caused us harm in those changes to our culture. So we have a thing where the men are spokespeople for our community or for our household, our family group, right? They're the spokespeople, but the women choose them, and the women tell them, this is what we need you to say when you go to council. And we've lost that, right? It's now the only thing that lives. Well, the men are supposed to speak and the women can stay back, right? That's not how it used to be. The men who were chosen to go speak for the family were chosen by the women, and they were told what to say by the women, and the wealth was held with the women. And so there's still some evidence of that happens in our culture, and it's still there. And so we have to figure out what it is that we can examine and look at, and what can we identify that is truly ours, and what was influenced that changed us for the worst, right? Or changed parts of our culture that we don't need to hang on to anymore. And I think about that in the context of corn, right? And like Kandi talking about the corn, it's such a precious, oh my God, Adi, you're the best. Corn is such a precious resource to us. And there's been so much change to the corn over the centuries that now, even when we have our green corn ceremony, there are elders who have to limit how much corn they can have, right? The very thing that is the basis of our faith and religion, they have to limit how much they can have, because sweet corn has been modified so much that the sugar content in it is ridiculous and puts people's, glycemic index off the charts, right? And we have to, think about, like, what are the ways that we prepared foods before, and how can we, like, remind ourselves our own advancements in technology. I mean, the idea of being able to cook corn in a way that we can gain the nutritional value, that's like deep scientific stuff that people figured out, right? All the way through, Central America, and came up here with nixtamalization, right? We still make our corn in the same way, where we add ash and we add things to it so that the corn can release what it is that nurtures us, right? That didn't just come by accident. That didn't come with colonization. That was ours. That's our science. That's our advancement, our technology. And we still cook that way. We still put ash or lye in our corn to open it up, to release what we need to be able to nourish ourselves from it. And I think now we're in a time where we're having to lean on each other as Indigenous peoples and Indigenous nations to try to share with each other, hey, let's remember how we used to cook the corn in that way. Or, maybe we lost some ways of preparing or saving or growing or sharing seeds. One of my favorite gatherings I went to last year was a corn conference. A conference on corn, a whole corn conference. It was really exciting to go to. And the biggest thing was, like, coming back with all of these seeds of beautiful colors of all these different varieties from indigenous peoples all through the Americas. That was my like most favorite like thing coming out of that gathering. But we have lots that we have to save. I mean, we have lots to be proud of and lots to be thankful for. I'm here today and I'm thankful for my grandmothers getting me here. And I'm thankful for all the things they've taught me, not just about cooking or being a woman, but also about history and what we should know about history. So.
Thank you, Bineshi. Oh, this is such a good conversation. I love you all so much. And I love seeing your babies in the picture too. I just love seeing them popping their heads in or waving at us. And Adi, I feel like, I mean, he's getting so big and so like, oh, I just miss him. A couple observations that I want to go over to Eva. So, I mean, I think we have to be brave when we look at colonization and not only the harms that it's done, but what are some of the sources of some of these harms, different worldviews, worldviews that, manifest destiny was mentioned, this idea of dominion over all things, dominion over life, and a worldview that had a dominant religion that embraced some of those things, and a religion that some of our people love and get lots of strength from. And yet we also have to recognize some of the harm that it has done. And when we have these tough conversations, we can talk about Thanksgiving and food, and it really just, it's about our lives. It's about this world. It's about our environment. It's about our future generations. It's about our grandmas, and I think about what feminism means to me, what it means for me to be an Indigenous feminist. And it's very much about the generations of the women in my family, right? And what they went through. And of course, we're very much tied to colonization. It doesn't completely define us, and yet we could never say it doesn't totally influence us and impact us. My own family history of like boarding schools and all of that, the abuse that went on, mission schools, those kind of things, and the harm that they did to our families, and my own family. And so I think about, as we bravely ask these questions, as we bravely face the truth, some of us can't help but face the truth. There's no hiding from it. And I think it's really a challenge too for non-Indigenous peoples to take up some of that burden of truth telling and listening without defensiveness, and really listening, even when it's hard stuff to hear, because we can't carry this burden, and we're all here together now. So, it's a beautiful thing to all be here together now. And how do we live together? I don't want to get all too that way, but but I was also thinking about like who we are now, right? We understand our history, we understand how we've come to be, and how we've gotten here. And I was really thinking about something that was said by Eva earlier, which is that it's so ironic that you don't have the land anymore or the resources to really take care of our people in some situations, right? And in Massachusetts, it's very heavily urbanized. There's lots of cities, there's lots of congestion, and land is very, very valuable there. It's hard to, have your land and have your recognition and be able to utilize the land in the ways that take care of our people. And I know I'm kind of asking a lot of questions at once, so I'm just going to throw stuff out there, and whatever feels right to you to answer, please do. But I was also thinking about like, who are we now? And, people have talked about romanticizing natives, right? And I think about Wampanoag people and like, who are we now? What are some of the beautiful things that we're doing? What are some of the ways that we are rebuilding our nation, coming back from this traumatic history? And I think about Eva and, relearning the language, bringing it back, bringing it into everyday life. And those are the ways that we face our trauma, we understand what's going on, and we build. We never negate our trauma. I don't believe in that false positivity where you're just like, oh, everything's all good. that comes from strength and courage and facing the truth and going from there. So I will stop there and turn it over to Eva.
Yeah, I like that question. There is so much going on today here in my homelands and with our Eastern peoples here to reclaim our languages, to rematriate seeds. I've been wanting to share. I brought my show and tell squash here to show, which is an Algonquian squash. It's an ancient variety from, if you look it up on the internet, it'll say Abenaki. The Abenaki people are just north of us, Wampanoag people here. But this squash is obviously traditional to this whole area. And, I received these seeds from a friend through the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness. And I'm about to send some of these seeds actually out to Montana to one of my cousins who lives on the Flathead Reservation. He has a farm there. And he's going to send me some of his corn seeds. And so there is this sharing going on. There's another organization here that I've been really happy to be able to support a little bit through IEN, the Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Collective, group of women, intertribal group of women on the East Coast here that are doing a lot of mutual aid work and growing things and sharing seeds and sharing knowledge and really bringing back the power of our indigenous ways, but also the power that we have as women in reclaiming that power that we feel that this dominant culture is just still trying to squash. Still trying to say that women are inferior. I mean, we're told that in today's society all the time that we're inferior. And that so many things. And so there's also another organization that is they say it's the first Native land trust east of the Mississippi. And so we have a mechanism here for people to donate land back to the people, land back. And they have been successful and gotten some parcels of land. I mean, it's not ideal, right? We're really reaching into a future that I feel is going to take, it's intergenerational for sure. I don't know how long it's going to take, but the system that has to be changed to restore our sovereignty, and to restore our rights, to restore our power and our dignity, not just as women, but as Indigenous peoples. There are some things that just are incompatible with that we have today. Like I feel, the idea of individual land ownership, and individuality in a capitalist system. I just truly don't see how that is going to be able to support a way of life that is sustainable on the whole Mother Earth, all the way around. I just don't see how that's going to work. And so, here we are today, and we have this opportunity to look back and say, yes, everybody praises us for sharing with those first English people who came. We saved them, right? We literally did. And a lot of us today would say, damn it, why did we do that? We shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have shared with them. We should have let them die. And, I think there's a part of all of us who feel like, gosh, I kind of wish we could just, but of course we know that we can't, we are here. We're not going back, time warp back. We have to move forward. But there are so many lessons, sharing, it's debatable, right? Should we have shared? Should we share? Should we continue to share? We've had so much taken from us. When are we going to get something back from all of that we've been given out and all that has been taken from us? But, quite honestly, how are human beings going to live without learning how to share? Like, sharing is one of the opposites of capitalist systems. So for us to encourage that lesson, that consciousness, it might seem small now, but maybe, you know, we can grow that. And so there are some silver linings, I think, that can help us to face the negatives in order to heal it and move on. Yeah.
Sometimes I don't know if I'm muted or unmuted, but no, I think you're so right, Eva. And I think it's okay. We don't have to apologize for wondering those things, given the history that we've had and, you know, and everything we've faced. And yet we still come at you with love. I think that's powerful, right? But I don't think that rage is inappropriate. And I don't think that, you know, it has its place. And we get to feel it, and it helps to move us. It helps to challenge us, and it helps to evolve us, right? But yet we are so powerful because we still come back at you with love, and we still have children, and we still hope, and we still work for organizations like IEN, and we still get out there and do it. I want to go to Kandi now, and I think we're starting to get close to our time. So I'm going to ask for some last thoughts now, and take your time. We have a little bit of time, but I'm going to go to Kandi now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this was just bringing up stuff around being mixed race. You know, I have a grandfather who was German, a grandmother who was Norwegian, you know, and I grew up on the res, and so I didn't really learn a lot about the other side of my culture, but that's who I am. And so it's interesting when people ask, like, what should we do? What could we do? And earlier I had said something about, you know, how we need space for our own healing from the trauma. And I think that's the same for non-Native people. But they can't create that space until they're willing and able to accept and understand the true history. And then there's all these generations and generations and generations since then that they've been kind of numbed or maybe forgot about it or don't really fully feel the full impact of the land, the taking of the land, you know, and the harms that were caused. And it's going to be uncomfortable. And that's what I would ask non-Native people to be okay with, is to jump into that level of discomfort and to really dive into that history and feel it and maybe grieve yourself and cry about it, but not in a way that is, you know, for us. It would be for yourself. And then after getting through that process of geez, dang, this is what this country is actually built on. That's the foundation. This is a bad foundation. We can collectively, as human beings and as people who care about people, about sharing, like Eva was saying, rebuild that foundation together in a way that's really strong for our children and our future generations. So my second grader isn't just learning about a turkey with feathers, you know, but can feel really proud and grow up in a way that is not so challenging as it was for me and still continues to be, like when I was in school. And to have people say, what are you? But you don't really look Native, or oh really, or how does it really impact you? And there's all these different levels, you know, of boxes and all of this labeling. And if we could just get past the labeling and get to the grieving and the healing, we could do a lot collectively, and then people won't be so angry anymore. I feel like a lot of non-Native people get so angry and they're like, oh, I was kind of watching the comments and I actually saw somebody say something like, oh geez, you want to get rid of another holiday next? And that's like, we've been talking about it this whole time. So I think they came on late. So I encourage that person to rewatch from the beginning to understand what we're truly saying and talking about here, which is not that at all. You know, we're talking about how much we do have to be thankful for and how we want to be thankful for it together.
He ate a cracker from the dirty floor.
Oops, I keep muting and unmuting myself. We're going to go to Bineshi next. But yeah, I feel you on the mixed race thing. And, you know, we're always forced to define ourselves. We're always forced to prove who we are. And that's another burden as well. And I think that, you know, it's something that we will have a future webinar session on, mixed race natives. I think that's something we've been wanting to talk about for a long time. So I'm going to go to Bineshi and help us continue to close out. But then I will let Eva have the last word. So go ahead, Bineshi.
You know, I was feeling Eva's statement about like, oh, we shouldn't have fed them, right? and just thinking about that, and you know, yeah, I mean, if we would have known what we knew, what we know now, if we knew that then, I don't know if my people would have still been generous, right? They would have still been kind and generous. And that's the nature of our people. This idea of the noble savage is not us. That's what people were projecting on us. This idea of the noble savage, right? That is both stoic and reverent, but also wicked and harmful and violent, right? That's a narrative that is not actually a reflection of our culture as a people. That's a narrative that serves the purpose of colonization. I was reminded of, I don't know, what's the one crazy woman with the long blonde hair, Ann Coulter, right? She says her family were not immigrants, that they were settlers, right? Her ancestors were not immigrants, they were settlers. Right. And so if you change that sort of imagery of like settling, brings up these connotations of like, oh, they went somewhere where there was nobody, and then they like made the land and they made everything that is now, they made it, right? But they made it based off of violence against Indigenous people. They made it off of the blood and sweat of people they stole to be slaves to work that land for them. They made it off of violence and cruelty. And I think we have to, like, I care less if you erase the holiday or not. I'm saying own the whole truth, or don't feed me bullshit, right? Like, don't feed me bullshit at the table by saying like, oh, well, there was this benevolent meal. Like, say the things that we got that land through violent means. We got, we came here with the intention of taking and building an empire for whatever queens or monarchies that they were coming from, right? They came, the whole like even myth around Columbus coming here, was built on, acquiring more land, acquiring not just the land, but the right to claim whatever was there, including the people that were there. And even at that moment in time, they weren't even really considered people. They were considered like, oh, part of the resources of the land, right? Oh, we're claiming them too. And so I think, we have to be able to own both that story and that narrative. And I'm just saying that, like, to the non-native people who are listening into this, like, my request is just own the whole story. Don't try to like make this fluffy, warm, and cozy story about a benevolent meal at the table. Own the whole story, and then let's move forward from there. Like, let's move forward and say, yes, you came here with ill intention. Yes, you came here with violence. Yes, you came here with disease. And by the way, one of those traditional foods that gets eaten for Thanksgiving is ham. Pigs killed more people in this country than some of the sailors that came on the ships, right? A lot of the disease came from the pigs that they traveled with to feed the like soldiers that were in all these explorations. Anyway, I digress, but I want to just, be able to feel not this conflict that I can't celebrate my culture of being proud to like feed people and share and cook together and honor that, if I can't also honor that this moment is highlighting a moment that included violence and terror and harm to me, to my people, to my culture, to my identity, to my existence. And the intention was to wipe us out, right? And so unless people are willing to like own that story, I find it hard to think that we can actually come together in some way of how we live in this land together, and in relationship with the land. So check.
Check. Drop the mic. See, this is what it's like working at IEN. Strong women. You want the truth? Come ask us. I'm going to turn it over to Eva for our last thought, and then I'll say one last thing before we go, but I want to have some closing thoughts from Eva. Sorry about my dog.
Well, of course, now you say, here's some last thoughts, and my mind goes blank. No, I mean, my last thought really is though that, you know, and a few of you have shared too, that the day is very bittersweet, right? The day is very bittersweet. I too enjoyed watching my daughter and my son cook for me that day. And one of the things that will last for me with this year's Thanksgiving was, my daughter's now 8, and you know, every year I have to go through, you know, talking to the teachers. I guess what I'm trying to say is I do see an improvement a little bit. I don't know if it's because I'm here in Massachusetts and there are resources that, yeah, you know, Wampanoag people have been developing over time to share Scholastic, National Geographic, you know, all these things to get our story told and our voice heard. So maybe it is making a small improvement. But one thing that was very notable to me was that, you know, when I was a child and the topic of Thanksgiving and this whole thing came up, I felt so much shame. I just felt so bad. I did not like talking. I felt so like ganged up on, you know, to the point where it's like, regardless of what I said, this is what people believe. And people believe we don't exist. People don't believe, you know. So I had a really hard time as a kid. Talking particularly in the schools, of course, every year, school, here comes Thanksgiving, Pilgrims and the Indians. But for my daughter, on her she's doing remote school from home here. When the teacher showed the little video, she did a good job. She showed actually a really pretty good video that had a lot of the truth with the plagues and the slavery. The men, Squanto was taken as a slave. That's why he knew English, because he was kidnapped and taken as a slave. Went over to England, lived there for a long time, came back. And then when those English came and he walked in speaking English, that's how come he knew English. She was proud of the fact that she knew, you know, so much more. I said to her, I said, you know, you don't feel like you have to tell your classmates that you're Wampanoag. Don't feel like you have to. Because for me, again, it was very traumatizing. But for her, she said, no, I love it. I love being able to share with them that I'm Wampanoag. And so that was a shift for me, and being able to see, at least in my family and my generations, that, you know, my daughter was proud to say that she was Wampanoag and that she knew a lot of this history, and that, you know, it just made her feel somewhat special, I guess. And so maybe things are changing a little bit for the better, but if we continue to talk and to acknowledge, you know, people are in different places with this too. You were saying, Bineshi, there are non-Native people who are saying, we get it. We see this history black and white. It's right in front of us, you know, and we get it. And they're starting to move towards reparations. Today was this Reparations Monday thing that this group is trying to start around, you know, I mean, for African-American people, for Native American people, you know, land back, right? We don't want the money for our land. We want the land itself back. And I think that I think it's time to move past just the acknowledgement and the talk and into action. So I do look forward to what the future holds, but it's just so, it's a bittersweet. It's a bittersweet, but whatever it is, it's a vehicle for the truth. So we can embrace it that way.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Check. Drop the mic too. So I'm going to just end us with a couple thoughts and thank you all and invite people to come and continue to listen to our webinars. We will continue to have lots of really juicy conversations. If you have suggestions for them, please let us know. But I want to end thinking about our future generations. And we've been seeing them pass. Before we got on, Beneshi's son was saying goodbye to go in the other room so that she could be speaking. And we've seen Eva's daughter going back and forth and Kandi's kids going back and forth. And it made me think of my own child and of the children of all of our listeners today. I want to share a story about my 20-year-old child. And they came home from school one day and they were in their advanced history class and they were learning all this history, and they came home and they said to me, "Mom, this is killing my soul," because of what they were learning was all this terrible trauma, but it was taught in this way that was so matter of fact, and it didn't take into consideration how that story affects us, how the American story affects us and our children, and how that makes them feel when they have to hear this history and not our own. And this history that's so callously, just so callously lays it out. They might just mention genocide. They might mention, all the things that happen to us, and it's very casually done sometimes, right? But I also want to think about my own child and this sense of hope. And they were at school, and this was when they were in kindergarten, or they were in first grade, and we were going to do some cultural sharing or whatever. And my child was introducing the singer that we had brought to the school, and one little girl said to my child, "You mean we're going to see real Indians? We're going to see real Indians?" And my first grader looked at her and said, "You're looking at one right now." You're talking to one right now. You're talking to a real Indian right now. So I just think our kids are so much stronger and braver, but because of the work that we do generationally, and we all stand on the strength of the matriarchs and the ones who have come before us, as we move forward together. So we have a responsibility to our young ones to continue to be brave, to continue to stand up, to continue to face difficult truths, and to have hope, which I think is a courageous and revolutionary act, is to have hope, especially with everything that we're going through now. So I invite us all to go and hang out with our families, even if it's just one who COVID. And you'll find your loved ones, find your strength, find your courage, take up your responsibility for our coming generations. So thank you all so much, and we hope that you'll tune in again. Check.
Thank you, everybody. Bye, family, if you're watching from afar. Love ya. Mwah, mwah.
Peace, Kanai, Namu. See y'all later.
Matsugidads for facilitating, Simone. That means thank you. Inheradza.
Gigawabamin, minawa, miigwech.